On this Friday night, a carefully choreographed service for the Queen. The message to the monarch who couldn't be there.
But we are so glad that you are still in the saddle.
And the guests who did show up. Plus the complex relationship between Indigenous peoples in Canada and the Crown. 100 days of Russia's war in Ukraine. An inside look at the horror one village has endured. And the Ontario Premier wins a second majority. The consequences for Doug Ford's competitors.
Global National with Donna Friesen, reporting tonight from London.
We are overlooking the Tower of London tonight. Not far from here is St. Paul's Cathedral. You can see the dome of it off in the distance there. It was filled today with royalty, politicians, and special guests. A thank you to the Queen for her 70 years of service. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Queen was absent from that service, staying home after suffering discomfort yesterday, and she watched it on TV instead. It was announced today she'll also miss a horse racing derby tomorrow. But the couple who have quit royal duties and left the UK to live in the US did make an appearance. We have complete coverage tonight, beginning with Crystal Goomansingh.
With church bells tolling, a rare sight in royal life. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex reappearing in public in London. Just as impossible to overlook the absence of the Queen herself from Friday's Platinum Jubilee commemorations. What do you think of the fact that Her Majesty isn't here today?
Oh, it's a shame, isn't it? It's a shame that she can't be here, but we appreciate why. So, yeah, we'll just watch her on the television and she can watch everybody on the television as well. So
she gets joy from actually watching this as well, because it is, you know, this is to thank her for her duty to the country.
With 70 years on the throne, Queen Elizabeth is the longest-serving British monarch and the third longest-serving monarch in world history.
Your Majesty.
The Thanksgiving service at St. Paul's Cathedral was the spiritual center of the Platinum Jubilee festivities. The Queen is well known for her deeply religious convictions. When sharing her decision to not attend the event, the palace said it came with great reluctance.
We are sorry that you're not here with us this morning, but we are so glad that you are still in the saddle, and we are glad that there is still more to come. So thank you for staying the course.
The Queen is 96 and experienced discomfort after a long day of celebrations Thursday. She manages mobility issues, often walking with a cane these days, and spent one night in hospital last October. The palace routinely says she is in good health, but does need time to recharge.
The way the Queen is at the moment, brain is razor sharp, few mobility issues, but no sort of overt sickness.
Given her mobility issues, it's possible that the 24 steps of St. Paul's Cathedral, not including the 2 landings, may have played a role in the Queen deciding not to attend the service. She will also not be attending the Epsom Derby on Saturday, a beloved event for her and one she has rarely missed over the decades. Donna?
All right, Crystal Goomansingh at St. Paul's Cathedral, thanks. Well, services like the one today are carefully choreographed. Harry and Meghan arrived before Prince William and Prince Charles and took their seats, sitting across the aisle and a few rows back from Harry's brother and father. And they were not seen interacting with them, but they may have done so in private. They would not have been there, though, had it not been approved by the Queen.
She wants to see her family together. We know that we are now entering the Queen's twilight years. I think everything we're seeing is that the Queen wants all those loose ends tied up. She wants to go knowing that everything is in check, knowing that her grandchildren are at least on talking terms.
A little later, we'll get more insight into the Queen and how she manages challenges from an author who's just written a biography of her. To Ukraine now. It has been 100 days since Russian forces invaded. Ukraine's president sent a familiar message today to his people.
Великий народе великої України.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying Ukrainians have done what seemed impossible, stopping Russia from taking over the country. But tens of thousands of lives have been lost, millions have fled their homes, and there's no end in sight. Jeff Semple went to one Ukrainian village that is a microcosm of what Ukraine has endured.
This Ukrainian farming village of Vilkhivka sits just 30 kilometers from the Russian border. So when Russia invaded, this was one of the first places to be hit. Gennady Novikova says he was out buying milk when the shelling started. He rushed home to find a Russian rocket crashed into his backyard. A fragment flew through this window and struck his mother, a Russian-born farm worker, in the head. By the time I found her, she was already dead, he says. Novikova wanted his mother to have a proper burial, so he gathered some colleagues from the farm where she'd worked to bring her body to the cemetery. But as they lowered her into the grave, another Russian rocket hit, killing 2 young men, members of the burial party. It's a horror, says this farmer who attended the burial. No one thought this could happen in a cemetery. Russian forces quickly took control of the village. En route to Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, Olena Bobrisheva watched as a large convoy of Russian vehicles rolled down her street. We were so scared, she says. We hid in the bathroom. We didn't leave the house for weeks. The Russians took down the village's Ukrainian flag and knocked on doors looking for food and warm clothing. But otherwise, she says, the soldiers mostly kept to themselves, sheltering in this school. After about a month under occupation, the Ukrainians pushed back. Ukraine's military recorded this video as it launched an all-out assault on the school to take back the village. When the dust settled, the Ukrainians had won. But this is what was left. This is Ukrainian Street in the heart of the village, and it appears to have been the site of a major battle. We're seeing massive craters from rockets, anti-tank weapons, and bullets. Every single house on this street, except one, has been completely destroyed. Residents emerged to find Vilkhivka in ruins. And even in retreat, the Russian shelling didn't stop. Nadia Kettler's 32-year-old son, Alexei, was walking to the bus station in late April to collect aid when he was killed by a Russian rocket. Afraid of the cemetery, she buried him in the backyard. He has 2 young daughters. Our family was happy, she says. Now I can't even eat. I can't go on. Now, 2 months since Vilkhivka was liberated, there's still no electricity, gas, or water. Its remaining residents line up for donations of food, trying to rebuild and salvage their crops. Even as artillery thunders not far away. Jeff Semple, Global News in Vilkhivka, Ukraine.
Tomorrow, Jeff hosts a Global News special, 100 Days in Ukraine. It airs at 8:30 on Global Television. In Ontario, Doug Ford is starting a second term with a majority government. Voter turnout, though, was at an historic low. The majority of Ontarians didn't cast a ballot for anyone. Eric Sorensen on Ford's big win and voter apathy.
What a night and what a result!
A result so dominating that both major opposition leaders quit on the spot.
It's time for me to pass the torch.
I informed our party president of my decision to step down.
Doug Ford led the biggest province through the worst of the pandemic. Coming out of it, Ontario voters had little appetite for change. The campaign so lackluster, a record number of voters just stayed home.
The public this time around did not feel there was going to be a change in government and enough of them did not feel that there was a need to change the government.
Really good to see you.
Ford also transformed as a politician over the last 4 years, becoming a more moderate conservative.
You grow into the position.
He discovered that getting along with the federal Liberal government could work, at least in Ontario.
I'm not big into these political stripes. I don't care if you're from the red, blue, green, orange party. I'm going to take care of you. We're going to work hard and create jobs.
Ford found success wooing the same swing voters in the Greater Toronto area who had helped the Trudeau Liberals win last fall's federal election.
You've got to appeal to that middle-class voter, not be too scary. By showing that you can work well together and that you're a moderate does play to these swing ridings.
For the two opposition parties, a crossroads, in need of new leadership and faced with the perpetual predicament, progressive parties splitting a majority of votes cast and paving the way for the Ontario Conservatives to win a massive victory. Should this result spur some discussion for the like-minded to stop undercutting each other?
They might want to consider joining forces. There's nothing preventing a new party on the left emerging that combines the values and ideas of the Liberals and the NDP.
The NDP has long promoted proportional representation to better reflect the public's voting preference. That, of course, could reduce the number of Conservative seats. So don't expect any help from Doug Ford with that idea.
I think this system's worked for over 100 and some odd years.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
1 year ago today, the federal government unveiled its plan to address violence towards Indigenous women and girls and promised transformative change. As Dan Spector reports, 12 months later, many Indigenous leaders and advocates are disappointed at the lack of progress.
It was supposed to be a roadmap for the way forward, a national action plan to end violence against Indigenous women. Born out of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls' final report, the government also releasing what it called a federal pathway, promising transformative change.
I made a promise that we would confront those truths.
But 1 year later, advocates say not nearly enough has been done to stop what the inquiry's final report called a genocide.
This is a national shame. And it is also dangerous.
The chair of the National Family and Survivors Circle denouncing what she calls a lack of progress and accountability.
We've yet to see the adoption of clear timelines and measurable outcomes that are necessary to achieve transformative change that will keep Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people safe.
Indigenous organizations say, though the government has promised billions in funding, the money has not yet been accounted for.
While some funding is being done here and there, it almost seems like it's a patchwork.
The Native Women's Association of Canada walked away from participating in the action plan over concerns about the process.
This has not been a priority for the government. Some of the most significant steps that needed to be taken, including establishing an oversight body. We haven't seen that movement there.
The government released its own progress report Friday, pointing to recent advances in supporting Indigenous culture, safety, security, and justice.
Things aren't moving fast enough. But they are moving forward.
But to people on the ground, more is needed than pledges and promises.
The reason this is important is for the future. We don't want any more children going missing.
Brian Gallagher's daughter has been missing for 18 months. A man was charged in connection with her disappearance this week. His pleas for change are deeply personal.
There are so many families out there suffering the same realities.
Gallagher's other daughter is walking across Canada to raise awareness right now. The family says until there is meaningful change, actions to build awareness are still necessary. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
There is support available if you need it. The number is toll-free, 24 hours a day, 1-844-413-6649. New revelations about the deadly January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Coming up, what former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence was warned about the day before. There is more sinister information emerging tonight about the attempted insurrection on the U.S. Capitol in Washington on January 6, 2021. We know when the mob attacked, some people were heard shouting, "Hang Mike Pence," and a gallows was set up outside. Well, now information is emerging. Staff of the former vice president warned the Secret Service former President Donald Trump might turn on Pence. Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Prosco is following this tonight. Jackson?
Donna, the New York Times reports that on January 5th, the day before the attack, the chief of staff to then Vice President Mike Pence warned the Secret Service that President Trump was going to publicly turn against his VP, and that could pose a security risk. The warning, of course, turned out to be right. The next day, the mob stormed the Capitol and chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," after he refused to block certification of Joe Biden's victory. Now, the other significant development is the arrest of Peter Navarro. He's the former Trump advisor who was indicted for contempt of Congress because he has refused to cooperate with the committee investigating the events of January 6th. Navarro is the second Trump advisor indicted for defying subpoenas. 2 other Trump allies have been referred for prosecution. And all of this sets the stage for a contentious week ahead. The first televised hearings into January 6th begin next week in prime time, and the committee has already promised to release previously unseen evidence about Trump's attempts to subvert democracy. Donna?
Jackson Crosco in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. The Crown and Canada's Indigenous peoples ahead their demands for reparations instead of celebrations. We're back from London in a moment. Welcome back to London. Over her 70-year reign, the Queen has gained respect and affection. For Indigenous peoples in Canada who have lived on the land long before it was settled by Europeans, the relationship with the Crown is complex. As Abigail Beeman reports, the Jubilee is sparking renewed questions about the monarchy's role in reconciliation.
The Indigenous relationship with the British Crown dates back more than a century before Canada's Confederation, when the first land treaties were signed.
We have a very special relationship with the monarchy because of that relationship through treaty.
As long as the river flows and the sun shines.
Over 70 years on the throne, and on each visit to Canada, Queen Elizabeth paid special focus to the relationship with Indigenous communities, including travel to remote areas during eras when the journey was more complex than it is today. But while there has always been some excitement surrounding visits and frequently even warmth for the monarchy among many Indigenous communities, for countless others, there's also profound disappointment and distrust.
I'm so angry. My anger is so deep.
For Beverly Jacobs, a Mohawk woman from Six Nations, 70 years on the throne is nothing to celebrate. She calls it 7 decades of what amounts to silence on missing and murdered Indigenous women, residential schools, and treaty violations.
To try to erase us as a people, they've never taken responsibility for that.
Some find hope in the appointment of Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General, Mary Simon.
I am sorry. I am more sorry than I can say.
Others in the recent apology for residential schools from the Archbishop of Canterbury, the spiritual head of the Church of England. There are formal calls for the Queen to apologize too, most recently from the AFN's national chief directly to Prince Charles during last month's royal visit. But there are a multitude of perspectives.
I think that's a waste of energy and time.
It's not just an apology we're calling for. I hope people realize it's the call to deal with this.
A call for change and action to right wrongs past and present as the relationship between the Crown and Canada's Indigenous people moves forward. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Over the span of her reign, the Queen has outlived or outlasted a multitude of world leaders. When she was crowned 70 years ago, Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, Joseph Stalin, and Louis Saint Laurent were in power. She's endured through 14 British prime ministers, 12 Canadian prime ministers, and some 170 Commonwealth leaders. We're back from London in a moment. Welcome back to London. The Queen is one of the most recognizable people in the world. Despite decades in the public eye, though, she's remained largely inscrutable. I spoke with Robert Hardman, who has covered the royals for years and just wrote a biography called Queen of Our Times. 70 years is an awfully long time for anyone to be in any role. What do you think is the significance of this moment?
It's just one of those moments, I think, where certainly in this country, we just sort of stand back and realise that although we've taken the Queen pretty much for granted for the best part of 70 years, because she's so reliable, she's always there, she always turns up, she always does what we expect her to do, now's the time to realise actually that is quite something, what she's done. So I think for her, it's a great reflection on what she's achieved, and it is considerable. I mean, to have held the country and the institution together all these years, to be running a hereditary institution that's as strong today as it was when she took over. I mean, people will look and say, oh, look at the monarchy, you know, all sorts of crises. I mean, it's always faced crises.
I think some people might take issue with that.
Look at the 90s. I mean, that was a very, very dark period.
92.
Much worse than now. I mean, 92, she famously talked of as her annus horribilis, but it really marked the start of a sort of 5-year period of fractured marriages, rows over money, culminating, of course, in the tragic death of Diana when she was perceived to be out of touch. I mean, those were seriously, not quite existential, but I mean, that was a real crisis period for the monarchy because it affected the direct line of succession. You know, it cast doubt on the Queen's heir.
And I guess we kind of collectively move past those things and think we look at the latest crisis.
Of course, yeah, we do. We're always looking at the here and now and thinking, oh my goodness, how is she going to cope with this?
The Harry and Meghan question.
Harry, Meghan,
yeah.
Andrew, you know, these are, I would call them challenges rather than crises. I mean, they're not an immediate threat to the whole institution. But this is what she's been going through all her reign.
How aware is she of the changing times, of how she needs to change with the times?
She's very aware. I mean, she might not show it because that's not the nature of monarchy. You don't just sort of suddenly respond like a weather vane. You have to absorb shifts in public opinion and you have to respond to them. And you have to accept that life isn't always going to be the same. I mean, Prince Philip once said to me, you know, I mean, actually the monarchies that have gone, the reason they went, most of them, wasn't because of revolution or radicals. It was because the people around them just kept them cocooned and wrapped in cotton wool and wouldn't let them change. And you have to change, and you have to do it. You have to evolve. Monarchy is a work in progress. It's got to move with the time.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And that is Global National for this Friday. We'll leave you with some moments from St. Paul's Cathedral today. The Queen was unable to attend her own service of Thanksgiving, but her presence was felt. Thanks for watching. Good night from London.